Heavenly Father, as we come before you tonight, we thank you for the privilege of assembling together and to fellowship together and to also hear from your word. And Lord, we pray that you would open our minds and hearts, that we could hear a fresh and important word that would help us in an edifying way and constructive way to draw closer to you, to abide in you, and to be better equipped to do your work in this world. Lord, we just pray that you would be present both in myself as the speaker and in our audience here that participates with us in this, Lord, that together we could understand in a deeper way your wisdom and purpose for your church and for the world. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay. Like I said, I'm not the normal one that does the Wednesday nights, and I'm not as polished as these guys, so I'm going to have to refer to my notes in putting this together, because coming to chapter 12, if you have your Bibles available to look at them, you will see we begin in the first sentence with the therefore. And what Paul is doing, like other speakers in the Bible, when you see this therefore, he's taking the information that's been covered so far and now is drawing a conclusion from it. And so therefore, for us to understand the teaching in chapter 12, and you'll find it to be on a surface level very practical kind of teaching, but to understand the context in which he may be applying to this, we need to go back and reflect again on what he has shown us up to this point. Now, he's covered a lot of doctrine, a lot of fundamental information, and I don't intend to rehash what our pastors have done a far better job than I, but there's some points I'd like to spend a little time to make, because it does have a bearing on how we think maybe why Paul is discussing what he is in chapter 12. So if you all can oblige me to do sort of a cursory review and also to cite my notes in this, I want to ask you all to feel free to speak up and to interject as I'm going through this, because I'm going to have to be conferring with my notes, and we're going to have questions to ask you all as we get into the body of the new chapter. But reflecting back in chapter 1, and again, we're looking for the context of information that he is referring his therefore to at the beginning of chapter 12. I wanted to mention to listen for some particular words that he commonly mentions. God's mercy, forbearance, grace. These are words that keep coming up in events that have happened in the history and in the world and in the spiritual history of God's people are manifestations of those things. God's mercy, God's grace. And it will compel us to respond, as we'll see in chapter 12. In chapter 1, he mentions that the gospel was foretold through the prophets and the scriptures, in verses 1 and 2, about Jesus whose flesh was born from the seed of David. So he has a Jewish root connected, through whom all people, both Jews like Paul and Greeks like the Romans, have received grace through Jesus Christ, in verse 5. Paul also mentions that he was a Jew, and as a Jew, has a debt to both to the Greeks and the barbarians. And this connection he had to them was connection by the gospel, in verses 14 and 15, which provided the power of God's salvation to Jews and Greeks, which again is a recurring theme we've covered in this class so far, revealing a righteousness for both by faith. God had revealed many of these attributes since the beginning of time, these general attributes of God's purposes and plans to both the Jews and the Gentiles, as he concludes chapter 1, while he notes that those who ignore it will descend further into wickedness and the revelation that he's given to both camps. Now in chapter 2, he notes that those who judge others for these types of wickedness are often guilty themselves of it, and do not emulate God's forbearance and long-suffering towards those in such darkness, with such goodness from God intended to lead them to repentance, in verse 4. Again, it's God's goodness and forbearance. And those who are self-seeking, while those who are self-seeking, as he mentions, will receive tribulation, both the Jew and the Greek, or blessings with those of both camps who do good, because, quote, there is no partiality with God. So those who seek their own fortunes, ignore that of others, are going to receive tribulation really from God's hand, or this is the fruit of their own works, while others will receive blessing. But both Jews and Greeks will have this equally. He knows that both Jews and Gentiles are compelled to follow a type of law that God has put into their hearts. In verses 14 and 15, a type of law adherence which Jews often boast about with their history. But they're no better than the Gentiles when they don't follow it. Because, as he says, a Jew is one who is only inwardly of the heart, in the spirit and not the letter. So this is not an advantage for the Jew if they don't follow a law that they take pride in. Now the Jews did have advantages, as he talks about in chapter 3, of being the first recipients of God's written truth. But he notes that, quote, both Jews and Greeks are all under sin, in verse 9, because no one has a lock on seeking God. And the track record of God's people has not been good in their zeal in seeking Him. And he further notes that, quote, by the deeds of the law, no flesh will be justified in His sight, for by the law is the knowledge of sin. Let me repeat that. By the law is the knowledge of sin. Just like the law of commandment, if you think about this, associated with the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Okay? The knowledge of good and evil came through a law or a command that was provided at the beginning of mankind. Thankfully, though, he gives what I consider the key passage of the book of Romans for us to consider here. And this is verses 21 through 26 in Romans 3. Let me share it. He says, but now the righteousness of God apart from the law is revealed, being witnessed by the law and the prophets, even the righteousness of God through faith in Jesus Christ, to all and on all who believe. For there is no difference. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, being justified freely by His grace through the temptation that is in Christ Jesus. By the redemption, that is in Christ Jesus, whom God set forth as a propitiation by His blood, through faith, to demonstrate His righteousness, because in His forbearance, God had passed over the sins that were previously committed. This was an expression of God's forbearance. To demonstrate at the present time His righteousness, that He might be just and the justifier of the one who has faith in Jesus. Okay, and he further notes that just as all have sinned, both Jew and Gentile, both rely not on their righteousness by the law, but by God's imputed righteousness and redemption, received not by works but faith. Further revealing God's amazing forbearance in passing over mercifully the past sins of humanity, both Jews and Gentiles, both individually and as a people, and humanity in general. But He still maintains His justness, and we need to live in a world that's just. And I'm sure you're aware of that. A world without justice is chaos. But acting, as He says, as the just and the justifier, allows Him to be able to accomplish His plan. And in fact, it's as if the judge, God as the judge, passes a righteous judgment to maintain the order of the universe that He's created. But then He steps down, He takes off His robes, and then offers Himself as the recipient of the judgment. So He was able to fulfill the requirement of judgment while yet offering to take the penalty that He has to impose on it. As a consequence of that, it eliminates boasting by both Jews and Gentiles, or any reliance on the law except what He calls the law of faith. God will justify both Jews and Gentiles through faith, which establishes the real purpose of the law of God's plan, and that is in making recognition of sin available to mankind and the need for faith in God's solution. So the law's accomplishment is making us aware that we're sinners. Okay, now in chapter 4 he says that the father of the Jews, Abraham, was deemed righteous not by keeping the law or other works, but by faith in God. And for all who, quote, believe on Him who justifies the ungodly. This was the faith of Abraham, who believed on Him, on God, who justifies the ungodly. And even David confessed to this truth in verses 7 and 8. Abraham had this faith, important to know, before circumcision. But therefore, this state of righteousness is available even to uncircumcised Gentiles, as he was the father of all who believe. Okay, people take a lot of claim for Abraham on who he is, who's their heritage in Abraham. Well, the fact is, all who believe and have that faith, Abraham is their father, or patriarch. And he mentions that the state of inheriting the world that was promised to Abraham is through his seed, and not by the law, but by faith. So by having the faith of Abraham, you become an inheritor of the promises to his seed, according to Paul. Now in chapter 5, he mentions that this justification by faith brings peace to us with God through Christ. While we were yet sinners, he died for us, and he reconciled us through his death. And he mentions an interesting thing here. He says, because of Adam, death passed to all men through their sins. The emphasis up to the time of the law, the consequence of sin was death. But then he mentions that with death, death was universal consequence until Moses came. And after Moses came, the law was given, and then individual sin began to be imputed to each one of our records. The law itself provided a record where not only was death a consequence to all of humanity because of the fallen world, but an individual record of each one of us individually was collected. And we died to our old selves when Christ died, as Christ died, and we resurrect with him to a new start to not be any longer slaves to sin in chapter 6. Because he says sin won't have dominion over you because you're not under the law but grace. Since the law is not in effect, we actually take advantage of that to not be under the yoke of sin. And that's the importance of why we move on beyond the law, because it takes the power away from sin. But having been free from sin, he concludes in chapter 6 by saying, we do become slaves to righteousness. But we still have something to answer to. We still serve. We serve the cause of righteousness at this time. Now in chapter 7, it's one of the most interesting ones I find, because he says you've become dead to the law, to the body of Christ, that you should be married to another. So there's a new marriage, and this would be something very important for the Jews to understand, is that there's a death that has occurred and they've moved on to a new relationship. Because he said we've now been delivered from the law. And as good as God's law is, it's awkward to hear Paul saying you're being delivered from it. But the sin comes as a consequence associated with the effects of the law on our sinful members. So that we should serve in newness of spirit and not in the oldness of the letter. Now, you could say that, and this is just my perspective on this, based upon what he says here in the middle of the chapter, on the subject of legalism, you could even say that the law began all the way back in the Garden of Eden. I mentioned the commandment about the tree of knowledge of good and evil. When you look at the middle verses of Romans chapter 7, if I could just summarize verses 7 to 11, he says, yet if it had not been for the law, I would not have known sin. For I would not have known what it is to covet if the law had not said, you shall not covet. But sin, seizing an opportunity through the commandment, produced in me all kinds of covetousness, for apart from the law, sin lies dead. I was once alive apart from the law, but when the commandment came, sin came alive and I died. The very commandment that promised life to me proved death to me. For sin, seizing an opportunity through the commandment, deceived me and through it killed me. Now those are pretty harsh words to talk about the relationship of the law and working through the sinful flesh, the consequence. But I found it very interesting to look at that passage and replacing the word sin with the word serpent. If you replace the serpent in it, you basically, on a revised reading, you see a faithful retelling of the first act of sin in the Garden of Eden. Mankind was presented with this initial version of the law in the early days of its existence. And it basically comprised one thing: of the tree of knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for the day you eat of it you shall die. In Genesis 2:17. And then here we learn that the subject of the commandment pertains to the knowledge of good and evil. And what did we mention before about the law? The law teaches us the knowledge of sin or evil, and the death that's associated with it. Well, once the law was present through that commandment in the garden, the serpent suddenly appeared, seizing an opportunity through the commandment, producing all kinds of covetousness, including what do we know? The delight of the eyes and the desire for wisdom, Genesis 3:6. Thus, let me insert this into the passage in Romans. Thus, when the commandment came, the serpent came alive and I died. And the serpent, seizing an opportunity through the commandment, deceived me and through it killed me. So from this, I perceive that the deadly power of the fruit was merely the act of breaking the commandment of law itself. with the irresistible urge of disobedience, producing the fruit of sin derived from the presence of the law. Even while, as Paul says, the law is holy and the commandment is holy and righteous and good. Thus, I believe that the power of the tree is derived from the commandment itself. Because of human nature and the way it is, the presence of law cannot deliver righteousness in men. It only produces a fall, sin. Satan makes use of the law to deceive man by misusing and contorting the law to sabotage man's relationship to God. This tree is indeed rightfully named the tree of knowledge of good and evil, for the real purpose of the law is not to save, but to provide the real knowledge of good and evil. This becomes apparent upon breaking the law, when the real revelation came to Adam and Eve and the rest of us. God is good, and I am evil. Thankfully, apart from the law, the serpent lies dead, as the reading of his text says, as Christ's redemption through the new covenant provides for the vanquishing of the serpent, along with the completion of the law's mission, and the privilege to finally partake of the tree of life, of which there is no law except what's called in James the perfect law, the law of liberty. As you understand, this would complete Christ's mission when he started his ministry, to proclaim liberty to the captives, as he said at the beginning of his ministry in Luke 4:18, that were in captive and bondage to Satan. And so this liberty occurs through him, and it allows, through Christ's redemptive work, what I see as a type of cosmic jubilee. Okay, if you remember in Leviticus 25, I think 25:10, you can see the jubilees. What happened at the jubilees? They freed people from bondage that they had. Any kind of bondage you had if somebody was released. You got to go to your eternal land where you came from and to live with your long-lasting family. And I think that's what happens through Christ's redemptive work in this Jubilee, is that he proclaims a year of Jubilee for all of humanity, and he allows us to return to our families, to our own kin right there in the garden, in the family of God, and then to enter into his rest. Because you know, Jubilee is a year of rest. And we enter, as Hebrews 4 says, we enter into Christ's rest at that time. Now chapter 8 says that the law, spirit of life in Christ Jesus has made me free from the law of sin and death. Because to be carnally minded is death, but spiritually minded is life and peace. Now here's another interesting passage that if you can give me a little creative endeavor here on this, and there's a point that I'm making in this that relates to chapter 12. He mentions in chapter 8 that for the earnest expectation of the creation eagerly awaits for the revealing of the sons of God. Now that's a strange passage in the middle of the narrative he's giving in chapter 8. Who are these sons of God he's talking about? Okay, they're mentioned several times in the New Testament and a few times in the Old Testament in Hebrew. There are some who believe that these sons of God were those angelic beings who were placed over the nations after the fall of the tower. When the nations were numbered, the 70 nations were divided. In fact, there's one passage I can mention here that alludes to it. Deuteronomy 32, 8, and 9. I'm reading from the ESV, it's a little straighter to understand. It says, when the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, he fixed the borders of the peoples according to the number of the sons of God. But the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob his allotted heritage. And when you consider that in other passages of the Bible, it does seem to support this concept that God was working through other servants, other high-level beings he had, to administer the other nations. And it appears, in fact, they may have eventually in time been worshipped as gods in these other nations, which is not certainly what God's purpose was for their work. And in fact, he reprimands them, and Jesus cites Psalm 82, and he mentions a quotation from that chapter where God calls these other beings gods, these sons of God. He says in Psalm 82, he says, God has taken this, I'm reading straight from Psalm 82, he says, God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? Give justice to the weak and the fatherless. Maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute. Rescue the weak and the needy. deliver them from the hand of the wicked. I said, this is God talking, you are God's sons of the Most High, all of you. Nevertheless, like men you shall die, and fall like any prince. Arise, O God, judge the earth, for you shall inherit all the nations. Okay, they're going to die like sinful men, even though they're these celestial beings, if we understand this correctly, because of their wickedness. And God, in fact, desires a new assembly or a divine council of redeemed ones who will rule over creation according to his wishes. And that's the great hope that we have as we're called, as creation awaits, as this chapter 8 talks about the revealing of the sons of God and daughters of God, I might add, is that God has a vast celestial purpose for us to give us the privilege of, and in fact Jesus alluded to this, in fact he told the apostles, he says, you're going to rule over the 12 tribes of Israel. And in fact, in another New Testament passage, he says, don't you Christians know that you will judge angels? So we often discount the large nature of the destiny that God has for us, and that's why the training and the very practical applications in chapter 12 are so important, because he has an extremely important destiny for all of us. We are actually supplanting very high-level principalities and powers in the authority and creation that he is bestowing upon us through his Son. So it's very important that we take these things very, very seriously. Okay, in chapter 9 it says, it's not of him who wills or of him who runs, but of God who shows mercy. God's mercy is the central point of the redemption and the right relationship of all of us. God has picked from both Jews and Gentiles, quote, vessels of mercy. Do you know you're a vessel of mercy? But that's how you should look at yourself. Okay, you're a recipient to collect mercy when it comes from God. All Jews did not receive it, he says, because they did not seek it by faith, but as it were by the works of the law. So being faithful to the law did not put them in a position through faith to become such vessels of mercy. And he adds to that, chapter 10, when he says, Christ is the end of the law for righteousness to everyone who believes, and that there is no distinction between Jew and Greek. Sort of seems like he hits that point a lot, doesn't he? No distinction Jew and Greek, because he's done a whole new thing. Now, in chapter 11, which is our chapter leading up for tonight, he gives a very important comment in total based upon this amazing plan that God has unfolded. And Paul has told us in Romans, he says, verses 18, he says, do not boast against the branches. The branches being those who have been part of God's history and God's family over time. We talked about the olive tree being God's family with the root of Christ, and how these different branches, and we read through the history of Israel, and eventually through their unbelief, some portion of those branches had to be removed. He warns the rest of us, both believing Jews and Gentiles, do not boast against them. But if you do boast, remember that you do not support the root, but the root supports you. And who did we establish the root was? It was Jesus Christ. He says, for you were once disobedient to God, now have obtained mercy through their disobedience. Even so, these who have been now disobedient, that through the mercy shown you, they may also obtain mercy. For God has committed them all to disobedience, that he might have mercy on all. So what God does through this, as we've concluded, now moving to chapter 12, is that he has used the natural attributes, even our shortcomings, and working all things together through good. He's taken, for example, a natural jealousy that comes through the Jewish culture, to use this in a redemptive form as they look in jealousy in God's work through the Gentiles. He wants to provoke them, and even Paul agrees with him, to provoke them back into the fold of God's plan today. God has used similar attributes in the Gentiles, or each of us individually. He works his plan to try to accommodate who we are, and yet use it for a greater purpose of getting us in line with his bigger plan. Now, when he goes into chapter 12, and thank you for bearing with me in that verbose preamble, there are some conclusions to that I'd like to just summarize from his doctrinal structure here. First of all, Jews and Christians are in the same state of righteousness. Both need the imputed righteousness of Christ and faith in his act of redemption. End of story. Okay, since it is a gift of his work solely, neither group has grounds for boasting or looking in arrogance over the other. Jews can't boast of the fact that they had the law and their legacy and history that we did not have and all these other wonderful history. Gentiles can't boast that they grabbed onto the offer that the Jews rejected. Since neither one has any iota of personal work that was able to accomplish this for them, they only received it. Boasting has absolutely no purpose or place for any of us. Okay, God has shown mercy to both Jews and Gentiles with his unique and unforeseen plan in history. And that's what I was just talking about. No one could have ever conceived how somehow he could have used the unique attributes of us for everybody to get mercy. God's unique work over time, involving Jews and then Gentiles in their own unique way, does not favor one over the other. Both are privileged, and the word privilege is important, to be part of God's plan and recipients of favor. He has made that opportunity for both of us. And the consistent theme is that God has shown unimaginable mercy on rebellious humanity, both Jew and Gentile. His patience and long-suffering reveal his what? Forbearance, that we should emulate. Okay? This forbearance has not been emphasized by Paul for us to shove it away. It is meant for us to emulate as we follow Christ. Persecution will help that in that perseverance, as well as striving against the flesh until it is redeemed as well. So that perseverance or patience, long-suffering, God has every right to use persecution to finally work it out, and that includes you and me here today. Okay? God is preparing the new sons of God to be the first fruits of a redeemed creation, to administer the cosmos according to his wishes in Psalm 82, to make it eternally sustainable. He has an eternal kingdom, the kingdom of God he's creating. And the attributes that he lists in Psalm 82 that they did not do were the ones that are essential to have a universe that lasts and operates healthily forever. And it behooves those of us who now have had this opportunity to be the new sons or daughters of God, out of gratitude for his mercy in his election of us, and acknowledging the future destiny he has planned for all of us, to begin to operate and train ourselves in these principles. The principles of what he wants. Mercy, forbearance, seeking assistance for the vulnerable. The revelations of God's mysterious workings in this narrative so far leads Paul to show the readers, from what we've established, how to respond in actions that reflect these truths, what we just said, and their mandate for our obedience and putting the plans in action. Okay, now we put this in context. Let's start with verse 1. In verse 1, Paul says in chapter 12, he says, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. Now the NIV has to me, a little clearer version of this when he says, in view of God's mercy, or in consideration. In other words, we've now considered God's mercy through this whole narrative of God's history. Now what do we do about it? Okay? This mercy is a mandate to respond by devoting yourself and myself fully to his aims, as a privilege of his sustained acts of favor on ourselves. And he wants to use us as instruments for this as well. And for him to expect this from us as living sacrifices in response to this divine favor is indeed reasonable, particularly since the fact that God himself offered his Son as a living sacrifice before us on the cross. So having offered his own Son, God himself has participated in such a sacrifice. It is reasonable that he would ask the same of us. Now, what are some attributes of a sacrifice? What would you say some general things that are common for anything that's presented as a sacrifice? This is a question.
Giving up of something valuable.
Okay, it's value. Okay. All right.
Something pure?
Pure. Anything else, any attributes about the sacrifice itself, other than its physical attributes?
It would be an offering of thanksgiving for God's mercy.
Okay. let me mention a few things here. It's the sacrifice itself is certainly not serving its own interest. If you're a sacrifice, you're not looking out for number one. You're providing yourself on some other greater good than yourself. Another thing about a sacrifice, it's at the mercy of God. It lays itself on the altar. It's purely at God's mercy. Another thing is, what's the purpose of a sacrifice? There's not much more a sacrifice is going to accomplish to put on its resume or its portfolio or whatever. Its last act as a sacrifice is to glorify God only. And when you become a sacrifice, you become these things. You no longer serve your own interest. You're at the mercy of God, and your purpose is to glorify God only. Now, how is a living sacrifice different from other sacrifices? What would be some guesses you would have?
It's still there after it's been sacrificed.
Okay. It
Continues on.
Continues. Yeah. It's not a one-time deal. Anything else? Anything else different about a living sacrifice?
Well, it can choose not to sacrifice itself.
So it has to make a regular decision to do it, right? It's not a one-time. It's got to crawl back up on that altar. Anything else?
It's a life of surrender.
Life of surrender. Right. You have to make that decision to surrender to crawl up on that altar. That's basically, as I see it, is it's a daily, repeated act of devotion and God-centeredness. Our lives reflect a sacrifice to honor God that everyone sees daily, or they should be seeing that out of us daily. The fires of our devotion and dedication to extending God's mercy to others produces a regular sweet savor in heaven, just like a sacrifice. And you know what? Even other people find that pleasant too. When they see you have a life of sacrifice, even other people can enjoy it. Now, verse 2, it says, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is good and acceptable and perfect will of God. These are all very classic, famous texts. But let's first think about this renewing of our mind. How can we renew our mind?
Reading the Word.
Okay. And how does that renew your mind?
Just reminds us of all that Christ has sacrificed for us.
Replaces lies with the truth.
Okay. It provides a wisdom greater than what's in our noggin currently when we sit down, right? So it renews it.
It also prevents us from leaning on our own understanding.
Right. Talk about a daily struggle, whether to lean on our own understanding or not. Commitment to time of prayer, thinking on higher things, meditating on God's Word. And I also would add learning from God by watching Him in action. All those things we listed are critically important. But there's a time just to sit and watch. Watch God in action through people you know. Watch ministry when it's going on. Watch God doing something on the other side of the world through somebody you don't know. You will learn more about God and renew your mind by making yourself aware of what God is up to everywhere around you. Now, on the negative side, how do we conform to this world? We're told not to do it. I guess we should understand what that is. What are ways we conform to the world?
By replacing God's word with worldly wisdom.
Okay. What would be some of that worldly wisdom? Do you have any examples?
Take care of number one.
Feels good, do it.
See what's going on in the world and emulating and starting to
Yeah.
you start to go that way instead of looking to God. You start looking away.
Right. You know, I see more and more of this in more of a Darwinistic fashion. A lot of talk about origins and evolution, things like that. But to me, I'm even more concerned about social Darwinism. And I believe the worldliness is basically, it's like a form of Darwinism. These Darwinian views of men believe that other people are only valuable in what they offer us. Okay, that's how you assess the value of other people and what they had to further what our agenda is. And a survival of the fittest mentality, whether it's in the workplace and economic affairs, whether it's in resource distribution in our community around the world, or even in physical confrontation and conflict, gunboat diplomacy. Whoever's got the most guns, or the most gold writes the rules. Okay, this is all Darwinism and it's all worldly thinking. Because it's a thinking that ignores a God and his value system. And what do you do? There's only really one alternative. You have an anti-God value system, and this is the only one that it is. It's selfish, it's self-centered, and it's destructive. Okay? It also includes an obsession with materialism and world-established status symbols and the peer pressure that comes with it. Everybody, all your neighbors, working yourself to death, your family members, trying to keep up with the Joneses, or what the latest things that we're all expected to have. Trying to meet the standards of other people. Rather than seeing these physical things, that our jobs and our bills we have to pay things, is really something that's just required to be done while we do God's physical work here. Rather seeing them as tools. Seeing the things that God's placed in you to manage is merely tools to do his work, rather than value judgment of who you are and have you arrived. And in fact, even the envy of the blessings of other people is part of this worldly thinking. All of this is what runs Madison Avenue if you watch television. Everything is about you got to look like this model, you've got to go do these extreme sports, you got to be able to drive this kind of car. And there's a one there running now for one of these car, Buick, I think, where this lady's looking out the window and sees the neighbor's got this new Buick SUV, and she's wondering if he got a new job or something, the neighbor. And her husband looks and says, wow, that's really lucky for them. She says, yeah, lucky for her. Talking about the man's wife, And it really encapsulates that mindset. It creates tension. It creates stresses in our life that don't need to be there. This is worldly thinking. Okay, what can the renewing of your mind accomplish? What does this verse say? If you have your Bibles open there to that. What does it give you as a byproduct at the end? In verse 2.
That you all understand what God's will is above the world.
And in fact, it says, by renewing this, you'll be able to prove, or finally be able to figure out, what God's not only good and acceptable, but his perfect will is. Okay? Unfortunately, the law, and as we've said before, Paul has acknowledged the law is good in and of itself. But it cannot give you the perfect will of God in its limited fashion. It can give you very primitive understandings of God's will. But it can't give you his perfect will. And in fact, even Scripture. Scripture is, and critically important it is for us to study Scripture. It gives us broad outlines for all of us collectively to read together on what God's thinking is, what his values are, the way we should respond. But ultimately, you're going to be put in a time and a place with some unique circumstances, unique people, unique things to consider, when you're going to have a renewed mind that you can reflect on the perfect will of God right then and there. And the circumstances you have may be different than me or somebody else, but may have to derive those answers out of Scripture or prayer in a different way than our other brother or sister does. But it's our responsibility to develop that renewed mind so the perfect will that helps us in every individual personal circumstance has been done. What's our destiny? Remember our destiny, if it's in fact to rule with our Lord in the cosmos, we better develop those situational skills. He's giving us a training ground right now to be able to understand how to have the mind of God. Okay, and that mind has to be sensitized, obviously, to the Holy Spirit's direction. In verse 3, he continues, "This is for I say, through the grace given to me, to everyone who is among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think soberly, as God has dealt to each one a measure of faith." The more I thought about this, I didn't see much in it, but then there was something that struck me about this. But I want to first ask you, what are ways that we as Bible Belt Christians might think more highly of ourselves both as individuals and as a group?
That we're better citizens, that we're more informed, that we have a better way of life. We have the answers.
Yeah. And we echo that back and forth, right? Christian media, everything else we have, we keep reinforcing. It's like what they call that, an echo chamber. Back and forth. There are no voices that stop and contemplate and say, wait a minute, let's do some self-introspection. Everybody's patting each other on the back and giving each other PR back and forth. Anything else? Anything else how we think of ourselves more highly than others?
Well, it's certainly very easy to fall into the trap because, I mean, we're told, we know the truth,
Mm-hmm.
and then it's certainly easy enough to cross that line of becoming self-righteous and saying, okay, we're given the truth, and so we have the truth, so you're wrong.
Right.
And, rather than doing what, God's called us to do, show mercy and grace,
Mm-hmm.
we're, more apt to be self-righteous and judgmental because we think we know the truth and they don't.
And part of that mercy and grace is probably listening. Just stop listening to people.
And showing that same mercy and grace that has been given to us to other people.
Right. Not imputing a negative attribute to other people when initially they're different than us.
Like they
Yeah.
say there is a God and I'm glad and I'm not him.
Yeah, that's right. I listed a few things. How we inflate our superiority of our evangelical rightness and heritage while ignoring its rough edges or uncertainties. Trusting in our lifelong or multi-generational participation in a church community is sort of a type of nobility. Not actively considering our own blind spots or shortcomings that we don't even contemplate or recognize, but others around us do, be they Christian or not. Ignoring even in our earlier life where we were misguided or misunderstood in our history, with the anticipation that there's probably some more of that to come in our own lives than I think. In other words, I'll speak for myself, I've changed so much of my views in the last few years. Who's to say that I've landed on it right now? I'm still walking on a path, trying to understand more deeper God's ways. And I'm sure the other person that I'm disagreeing with is on a similar path themselves. Expecting other Christians to conform to our traditions of manners in which we interpret the daily affairs of a Christian life. Boy, that's tough for some of us who come from different kind of traditions. And we all meet together in this melting pot of a church. And we're used to doing it this way. This is the way to take up offering. This is the way when you go get together and study the Bible or whatever.
The way you dress.
Right. Now here's the point that really got me thinking. What does it mean that God has given each one of us a measure of faith?
Maybe it's what you can handle at the time or something. I don't know.
Good point. Good, probably. Anything else?
What I hear is I don't have all the faith.
We're all just given a teaspoonful.
You don't have a corner on the market, you're
Nope,
saying?
I'm not the man of faith.
Not the faith vending machine? I think it possibly could imply that we forget that faith is a gift from God and not something we create on our own, and that we have to ask God for more of it. You want more faith? You're going to have to ask for it. As several gospel listeners, as it was written in the gospel, said, they asked of Jesus, increase our faith, or Lord, help my unbelief. At least they went to the right source to get it. That takes a humility to do that. We need to be patient with those who are not yet recipients of a measure of faith equal to our own in some matters. And this pertains to our thinking soberly about ourselves and our own spiritual limitations. We can constructively help others when we gently encourage them to seek an increase in their faith and the peace it derives as we pursue our own. Okay? So, we really do need to have God's forbearance, as he talks about, Paul says in his book. Forbearance and mercy. Our brothers and sisters here in this congregation, not everybody has been able to receive yet, may never receive a degree of faith that we think that they ought to have on one fact or another. And I know they're looking at me and wondering how come Mike Bennett won't increase his faith. in some areas that I'm struggling with. So we're all doing value judgments back and forth. When Paul says the reality is everybody has a measure of faith according, like you said, to probably what they can handle at the time or what they've had the boldness to request. And we're all at varying levels in our fellowship with these measures of faith.
It has to do, I think, as well, a faith to function, as he says in the very next verse. A measure of faith to function in a particular manner in the body of Christ. Because we all have different functions.
That's right.
So different measures of faith that match up with those functions.
That's the punchline that takes us even deeper, is what you're getting at. In verse 4, it says, "For we have many members in one body, but all the members do not have the same function. So we, being many, are one body in Christ, and individually members of one another. Having then gifts differing according to the grace given to us, let us use them. If prophecy, let us prophesy in proportion to our faith. Our ministry, let us use it in our ministry. He who teaches in teaching, who exhorts in exhortation, he who gives with liberality, he who leads with diligence, he who shows mercy with cheerfulness." How do we use our gifts in proportion to our faith and the grace given to us? How would you know, to me that was a hard thing to first understand.
Yeah, faith is what that was.
Yeah, that's right.
It was out.
I think I'm going to do some sober thinking. What's a way that we conduct our gifts in proportion with our faith? I think my thoughts were in line with what I believe you were getting. I'm sorry, what were you going to say?
Well, like I teach the kids in school, Sunday school, but I don't think I would like to teach the adults. I love teaching the kids, and I put together enough organization of my scriptures and the teaching to teach them, but that's my measure of faith. I'd love to just keep doing that, and that's good.
Well, let me use you as a point of the point I was going to make here, okay? Let me case it down. You feel called by God at this point now to teach those children, right?
Yeah.
Is that right, man? Do you have, for all the work that you put into that preparation, do you have faith that God will do a work in those children to raise them up spiritually in relationship to Him, in one way or the other?
Yeah.
You have faith in that, right?
Yeah.
That would motivate you to work as hard as you do to prepare every week. That you have a great faith and you care about that enough that you believe God will do a work through that ministry.
Yeah. I don't work through it.
Well, what I suspect what's going on in your life is going on with everybody who serves in the body. That the gifts God gives us will reveal latent talents He's energized to use for the body. But He also energizes a fervency in which we excel in exhibiting faith in the same area in which we're gifted. A faith that may not be given to others around us in that area, while their faith may be stronger in areas where they've been gifted. And I'll give you some other examples. For example, one who professes or prophesies may excel in faith in trusting what God says when it goes against the prevailing views in the world. The prophetic spirit that God gives them helps them to have a strong faith that God's way is the correct way and should be stood on regardless of the world's views. An encourager may excel in the faith that God will accomplish the best in other people, like Barnabas had with Paul when he first converted. A pastor will have great faith that God will preserve his flock. An apostle may have great faith into the big picture of what God will accomplish in society, while a giver will have great faith that God will accomplish good from it. They'll really believe that God is going to do something good out of that act. Similarly, someone who provides mercy will also believe God will not only bless the person who's received that mercy, but the one who gives the mercy as well too. People of certain gifts not only lead in the church with their talents, but they also set an example in the extent of faith they possess and exhibit while using them. And they should encourage others with it, but not browbeat them to measure up. In other words, we see somebody applying their gifts. We can see the great zeal that they have, and the faith that it expresses, that if they're working with youth, and they believe God is doing a great work with the youth, they are showing their faith in God's work to the rest of us. The rest of you using your gifts are showing your faith to other people to encourage them that God will bless acts of giving to other people or acts of mercy, that God is a God that does that. And we learn from our fellow brothers and sisters when we see them express their faith in the practice of their gifts. This requires God's patience and forbearance, and a remembrance that God has given grace for all of this accomplishment that you see going on in measure. So while we feel like we have more faith to believe God is going to work this out because we're gifted, we have to be patient with those who God has got going in a totally different direction. And the focus of their faith is on something totally different. This is a message for me to have to accept. I don't know about you all. Okay? But at the same time, he gives all these things in measure. Okay? We know not all singers are equally gifted, nor all teachers. I'm a case in point. But you know, God gives us and He dictates. The ultimate decider on the measure of gifting and the measure of faith is God Himself, because it's His church. And He will give the measure according to get His job done. Now, I'm just going to cover a few more verses, and I'm going to be able to be a lot more expeditious on next week's passage, so I'm going to just let this passage carry over if I have permission for that. I think it'll work out perfectly on timing for next week. But let me just do one or two more verses and get you on time. Verse 9, it says, "Let love be without hypocrisy. Abhor what is evil, cling to what is good. Be kindly affectionate to one another with brotherly love, and honor, giving preference to one another." Excuse me, Mr. Wasp. Okay. It says love without hypocrisy. The first question I have is, how do we love with hypocrisy? What do you think he's getting at with that?
Say it again.
Okay. Love without hypocrisy. So I ask you, how do you love with hypocrisy?
Like the world knows.
And what could be wrong with loving? You know, how could there be anything wrong with
Because it
that?
makes well, you just want something, you really just want something from somebody.
In return.
Yeah,
Wrong motives.
you're doing it with,
Yeah.
motives.
I mean, love is patient, love is kind. I mean, those are the,
Yeah.
that's God's definition of love. The world's definition is,
What kind, yeah.
love until it feels, love if
Yeah.
it feels good, if it, or what you can get out of it, or,
Yeah. Somebody might say, but I'm loving. Then the Bible says you should love. I mean, I'm loving. That would insinuate that there are different kinds and levels of love.
The NIV says love must be sincere.
Sincere. Which is basically the same thing without hypocrisy. Just take that minus sign off, puts an antonym there. I would say, sort of like what Joel alluded to, being preferential in who we love. Because it's hypocritical. It means your measure of love is different according to the person that you're with. Only those who we agree with, for example, loving. Or people we find attractive in one form or another. May they just be physical, maybe their personality, maybe what they stand for. Being preferential in love could be seen with heavenly eyes as being hypocritical in your love. We must love those we disagree with, or even are afraid of. Otherwise, your love is hypocritical. You know, I've seen these stories about Nazi guards, okay? These guys running Nazi camps. They just love children. They love their grandchildren, and they love their dogs. You know, you're seeing Hitler's pictures of him with his playing with his dogs. You know, they're showing all this love. Well, is that what God intended? I mean, was that the picture He wanted? If love is not broad-reaching toward all, which is really what Jesus showed, then the love has a dysfunctionality to begin with. It's certainly not heavenly love if it's preferential love. And that last part of that verse, when it says giving preference one to another, how do we do that? How do we give preference to one another in honor?
Consider others better than yourself.
Or just at least prefer, put their needs above your own. And
Right. Right. That's hard. That sounds obvious, but we are so naturally inclined from the time we're little tykes to be so self-focused that it really is hard to be really what I call sober-minded, to have a proper balance on other people versus yourself. It doesn't mean hate yourself, but it means to strive to have truly a real balance, unbiased by your own proclivities, to view the picture in others. And in fact, it would even go beyond that, to acknowledging others' works and efforts other than our own, giving attention to it, helping others meet their objectives and their needs before ourselves. These are the things that were not being accomplished when you go back and read Psalm 82, that weren't being done on a grand scale, on a world scale. They weren't done down on the community level or in families. And when Christ established this new kingdom of heaven, these kind of things need to happen on a global scale, they need to happen on a national scale, on a community scale, in our own homes. It's a radically different way of thinking than what the world had experienced. I'm going to do one more verse and we'll call it a day here. In verse 11, it says, not lagging in diligence, fervent in spirit, serving the Lord, rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation, continuing steadfastly in prayer, distributing to the needs of the saints, given to hospitality. Then it closes by saying, bless those that bless you, and bless and do not curse. Okay? Who are the hardest types of people for you to bless?
The ones you want to curse.
your enemies.
You're in
The ones you want to curse. End of story. Sorry? Enemy?
Your enemy.
Enemy. Yeah. How would you define enemy? I think we struggled with that. All right, and we talked about that here. Who's our
Somebody
enemy?
of opposite view, or somebody who hates you.
Yeah.
We talked about that a little bit in our home group last week, and afterwards I realized that God defines enemy as someone, it's either you're for him or you're against him. So you're against, if you're not for him, you're his enemy.
Yeah.
And so that's, I guess, how we could define our.
Talking about what Jesus said?
Still have to work on that.
Yeah, Jesus is enigmatic on that. Elsewhere he says those who are not against us are for us. And I think he did it on purpose to get us to think.
Right.
You know what's sad, and you said exactly right, and this is particularly true in the Christian community, those people who disagree with us are defined as enemies. And I'm thinking, is that a right definition of an enemy? Paul and Barnabas disagreed with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope they weren't each other's enemy. But they disagreed with each other.
I think an enemy is anybody who's actively seeking to hurt you.
Right.
Take you
Right.
down.
I think he identified them when he said those who spitefully use you and persecute you.
Right.
Mhm.
Right. And they'll always be there. Well, you might have respites for time, But I mean, in our lives, there'll be maybe one or more in various ways, particularly in the work environment or home, where that'll be the case. But if we throw a wide enough net to include everybody who we disagree with, then we've got a lot of enemies, or at least I do. I'd like to keep that as narrow as possible. But there are people, for various reasons, maybe it's because of something I did to them, they want to get back at me and see something happen from that. Here's some people who I just listening, Christians talk on, locally or on the radio. They're the people that I find many Christians say are hard to bless. People of other faiths, atheists, people with aberrant lifestyles or sexuality, critics and cynics of the things that are important to you, people who know and remind you of your faults. Not that any of us would have people like that in our household, just possible. People who take advantage of you. Those who speak poorly of you before others. Or make your life difficult at work or elsewhere.
They don't back you up.
These are all people that I think we could say at times are difficult to bless. Okay, when it talks about being patient in tribulation, boy, there is a lot of buzz, and I'm going to come to a close here, but This whole tribulation and persecution of the church is like the number one topic I hear with everybody right now. It's the first thing out of everybody's mouth. All my older friends that have been long-time devout Christians, on the radio, internet, this oncoming persecution. Okay, what's the scripture says? It says to be patient in tribulation. And I want to ask you, are you patient in tribulation? And what God may be trying to accomplish through it? Do you recognize God's hand in the tribulation as possibly the origin of it? Or do you try to avoid it and use the airwaves, email, politicians, and lawsuits to try to put an end to it? Are you always looking out for your own skin or what God is trying to accomplish? Okay, we're going to stop there. Probably got about 6 more verses to cover, just really a few comments, but we'll have some time. I won't do the long historical discourse, and the next one won't jump right in. We should have no controversy next week. It's going to be talking about obeying the government. So I don't anticipate any difference of opinion on that. We'll fly through that, I'm sure. But I want to thank everybody for your patience with me. Sorry if this was a boring initial discourse, but this forced me to stop and really think about what is the picture Paul's trying to get at with this. And I really feel at least what he's getting to, because these are very, very practical things he's talking about in chapter 12, is that he emphasizes this grand scheme that God had, nobody can understand. It eliminates any advantage anybody has, any kind of trump card anybody has. Everybody's just lucky to get picked. Therefore, it makes it ridiculous that any of us would hold ourselves over our fellow person. You know, we're a bunch of blessed people that won the lottery. The ultimate cosmic lottery. That God shined his favor on all of us with all of our hang-ups. Jews with Jewish hang-ups, Gentiles with Gentile hang-ups, our hang-ups with each other. And in spite of it, what does Paul say? God ultimately had forbearance. Can you imagine how he sat on this plan for millennia? And all of his followers are saying, God, why don't you deliver me from this or from Nebuchadnezzar or this, or when are you going to redeem Israel? When are we going to do this or that? And he's sitting on his hands because he's got to wait till the right time to reveal Christ and to show it all. And he still hears Christians today that says, when are you going to do this? When Christians don't understand that sometimes persecution is sometimes the best days of the church. And so God showed forbearance with all of us as humanity. He shows forbearance with all of us as individuals. He takes time. He takes patience to let us try to get our act together and understand who he is. And do we not deserve that for each other? For our spouses, for our children, for our parents, for each other in church? Should we not try to emulate God's forbearance and patience and let things work themselves out? Not think of each other highly. Not try to make everybody a little microcosm of who we are in the church. Okay? Elsewhere he talks about the foot can't say you're a hand or whatever. We got the point of that. And I think he goes deeper in this passage. He says, yeah, we're all different, but we not only have gifts and abilities we can do, but we have faith advantages. And the faith advantage of someone with the children is going to lift all of us up. Another with the faith advantage for the youth or for what's going to happen in our community is going to lift all of us up. And that's another part of God's plan. He uses all of us and all our quirks to lift all ships in the sea. And so I hope you derive comfort from that and a confidence that your faith in God is well placed. That after several millennia of working everything out perfectly according to plan, maybe he can get our lives right. And maybe it's not too big a task for him to sort out everything that's going on with us. And when our story is written one day, there's going to be a story just like this book, where it's going to show all the ups and downs and the critical point all of them had to getting us to the fruition of what God had intended for